I will return! You shall see, I will be back! So wrong, Earthlings!
We'll be here waiting for you, Kim Jong-il.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Adrian Lloyd, and this is just my stupid opinion. Today I want to talk about Kim Jong-un and North Korea. As I'm sure many know by now, we are currently going through a second Cold War involving nuclear weapons. This time, our enemy is North Korea. So for a while now, North Korea's been trying to get their hands on a nuclear missile. And they've had some successes in terms of getting a nuclear bomb, but they haven't had much success in actually being able to attach it to an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile. Well, a few months ago, they finally managed to pull it off. And they got their hands on a missile that could fire 2,000 miles straight up vertically. So now there's actually a danger of them being able to actually strike nations with their nuclear warheads. To which they decided to threaten Guam. Trump stood firm during their threat of Guam, saying he will rain fire and fury down upon them. And eventually they backed off on that, but then they started threatening Guam again. And they've been upping how many missiles they've been testing. And recently they fired one, and it was a big boy. So as we can see in this article from Newser, how does the power of North Korea's test compare to Hiroshima's? Tremors from today's nuclear test could be felt in China. That's how powerful this bomb was. It gets a little scary when you think about that. North Korea on Sunday carried out its most powerful nuclear test yet, an underground explosion that caused tremors that could be felt in China and South Korea. We've all seen the pictures of Hiroshima and know how awful an event that was. This one's saying that this new bomb, this hydrogen bomb, is not even close to that. It's going to cause even more damage. Now, people talk about how such destruction happened in Japan because they weren't using concrete structures. There was a lot of huts, timber, straw still in use during that time. So that way the explosion was able to destroy it all. But however, if we have a bomb that's 20 times as powerful, 100 times almost as powerful as what was dropped there, then concrete structures mean nothing. In event of the missile test, Donald Trump ended up meeting with his generals to discuss what his next move was. With concerns going around like this, a reporter caught him when he was coming out of the church, and he had this to say.
Mr. President, will you attack North Korea?
It doesn't really make you feel good that that's his answer. But at the same time, if you kind of break it down, it makes sense. If he's going to say, no, I'm not going to bomb North Korea, he loses all face. Because now North Korea knows that they can threaten America and he's not going to retaliate. So this was obviously a political ploy. But at the same time, it doesn't give you comfort when a guy who's got the red button says, I might press it. How bad was this missile test? Well, the Washington Post has published a history of nuclear tests and points out that North Korea is the only country that has performed 1 or 6 in the 21st century. It also explains that the estimated yield, meaning how much energy is released in an explosion, was 100 kilotons versus the yields of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which were 15 and 21 kilotons respectively. But the US has performed the most powerful test ever. But we're comparing 15 and 21 kilograms to a 100 kilogram bomb. There's a couple websites out there. What you can do is you can actually see on a map of your country, your city, your neighborhood, you can see what the blast effect would be if a nuclear bomb was dropped right in your area. I suggest, considering recent events, I suggest everybody watching this take the time, the 5 minutes, to go find one of these websites, find your city, and see how bad a bomb being dropped of this size would be. When I did it for Ottawa, I was only managed to find one that was able to go as high as 50 kilotons, but pretty much blasted apart most of the entire city. This one is twice the yield of that. This one can completely blow Ottawa off the map and just about any city and its surrounding suburbs. Just think about that if that was your city that got striked. In fact, situations are getting so bad that Japan is prepping for evacuations of tens of thousands in South Korea. As tensions on the Korean peninsula reach new heights with Pyongyang's latest nuclear test, Japan is planning for a possible mass evacuation of nearly 60,000 Japanese citizens currently living or visiting South Korea. Quote, "There's a possibility of further provocations," Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said at a Monday meeting with ruling coalition lawmakers. "We need to remain extremely vigilant and do everything we can to ensure the safety of our people," end quote. In response to North Korea's 6th nuclear test, Japan and the US seek to ratchet up economic pressure on the rogue state through an oil embargo and other measures. But US Defense Secretary James Mattis on Sunday has also said any threat to the US or its allies, quote, "will be met with a massive military response, a response both effective and overwhelming," end quote. We really haven't seen this sort of talk since the Cold War has gone on. Really, a missile could be fired any day now if you think about it. If we're going to look at it in realistic perspectives, any day now, just like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, a missile could be fired. One missile is all it takes to spark World War III. If one missile goes up, another nation responds, and it's all over. This really is a serious situation we're in. Our parents have talked, I don't know how many people listening to this whose parents have talked about the Cold War. My parents talked about living through the Cold War, even though they were younger at the time, just becoming teens and young adults when things were wrapping up. They still talked about how scary things were, about how really they didn't know every day if they woke up if that day would be the day. Now we're going right through that right now. If you ask me though, this is a little bit scary for us than it was for them. They were see, back in the day, it was America up against Russia. Russians are fucking crazy, but it's not the same if we're comparing it to North Korea. North Korea is brainwashed. Their people live under constant surveillance, constant propaganda. So for the likelihood of them turning on their leader there's virtually none. When you have a population that's completely under your control, you don't have to worry about any uprising. So unlike over here where they follow their leader 100%, some because they've been brainwashed to do, others because they know if they don't, they will be forced into prison camps or worse. Over here in the West, we have people with independent voices. So they're going to voice how they don't want the bombs to go off, and they will urge Trump not to do it. Now, not that Trump has ever done anything because of political opinion, but at least there is an option there. And for somebody in the past, such as George Bush or Obama, that was actually a possibility. Public opinion could sway them. Trump kind of does his own thing. But that's not the same in North Korea. If Kim Jong-un is talking about firing a nuke, there's not going to be any resistance from his people. There is actually a woman who did an undercover investigative journalism inside North Korea. So this was a novelist and a journalist named Suki Kim, and she was born in South Korea, ended up moving to the US. But she's actually spent much of her time since 2011 teaching English to children in North Korea in one of their prestige universities there for all of the well-off children of Pyongyang. So she spent a lot of time in North Korea teaching this. She took a lot of notes, kept a lot of information handy, and when she finally returned, she managed to write a book about everything back in 2014. This is an extremely dangerous thing to do, because if any of that had been discovered by North Korean authorities, she could have very easily been thrown into one of their prison camps for espionage. They would have thought she's a spy, for fuck's sakes. She would have been tortured, if not killed. So she took a big risk doing this, but she did it just to let the rest of the world know what conditions inside North Korea are truly like. So she managed to get this information out by putting it on secret USB sticks and keeping some of the information on her camera SIM card, and she managed to smuggle it out of the country when she finally left. But in this university she was working at, it is the Pyongyang University of Science and Technology, they are kept under constant surveillance, so at any point she could have easily been discovered. And I'm sure it's not just video surveillance. In today's age of technology, you have ways of hacking into people. So it's very possible that they could have had some sort of technology using to unknowingly hack into people's whatever. Their cameras, their phones. She could have been caught very easily. So the book that Miss Kim wrote was called Without You, There Is No Us, and this is in relation to a song dedicated to Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un's father, which was sung by the citizens, which pretty much stated that without Kim Jong-il, they are nothing without him. So as this article from The Intercept goes on to say, it says, Kim's book is particularly important for anyone who wants to understand what happens next with North Korea. Her experience made her extremely pessimistic about every aspect of the country, including the regime's willingness to ever renounce its nuclear weapons program. That doesn't bode well for the rest of us. North Korea functions, she believes, as a true cult, with all the country's pre-cult existence now passed out of human memory. Most ominously, her students, all young men in their late teens or early 20s, were firmly embedded in the cult. With the Kim family autocracy now on its third generation, you'd expect the people who actually run North Korea to have abandoned whatever ideology they started with and have degenerated into a standard human corruption. But the Pyongyang University of Science and Technology enrollees, their children, did not go skiing in Gstaad on school breaks. They didn't even appear to be able to travel anywhere in North Korea. Instead, they studied the North Korea's ideology of jushi, or working on collective farms. So when we look up what this jushi, I think as is pronounced, we look into it and we see establishing jushi means, in a nutshell, being the master of revolution and reconstruction in one's own country. This means holding fast to an independent position, rejecting dependence on others, using one's own brain, believing in one's own strength, displaying the revolutionary spirit of self-reliance, and thus solving one's own problems for oneself on one's own responsibility under all circumstances. The irony here is so thick you could cut it with a knife. Every single part of this doesn't apply whatsoever to the people of North Korea. Being the masters of revolution, well, they're kept underneath the fucking autocracy's thumb. Holding independent positions, you can't hold an independent position in North Korea. That's how you end up in prison. Rejecting dependence on others, they're all dependent on the state. Using one's own brains, believing in one's own strengths. If you believe in your own strength, then you're going against the state. So once again, this doesn't apply to North Korea. Displaying the revolutionary spirit of self-reliance. Once again, they rely on the state. It's a communist country and the state demands full dedication to it. So there is no self-dependence in North Korea. And solving one's own problems for oneself on one's own responsibility under all circumstances. Do I need to say it again? So this whole philosophy of jushi is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea claims that jushi is Kim Il-sung's creative application of Marxist-Leninist principles to the modern political realities in North Korea. This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. It's the absolute opposite of what everything North Korea stands for. But it's useful because it allows people who are learning about jushi all to feel that they actually are part of an independent race. Independent, superior, when really they're just brainwashed. Literally are sheeple. So as we return to the article from The Intercept, Unsurprisingly then, Kim's students were shockingly ignorant of the outside world. They didn't recognize pictures of the Taj Mahal or Egyptian pyramids. One had heard that everyone on Earth spoke Korean because it was recognized the world's most superior language. Another believed that the Korean dish Naengmyeon was seen as the best food on Earth. And all Kim's pupils were soaked in the culture of lying, telling her preposterous falsehoods so often that she writes, quote, "I could not help but think that they, my beloved students, were insane," end quote. You're not exactly wrong there, Kim. Nonetheless, they were still recognizably human and charmingly innocent, and for their part come to adore their teacher. So she ended up doing an interview for The Intercept. So just cutting into this part of the quote a little bit by John Schwartz. And then maybe saddest of all was to see the young men, your students, who were clearly still people, but inside a terrible system and on a path of doing terrible things to everybody else in North Korea. Kim: right, because there's no other way of being in that country. We don't have any other country like that. People so easily compare North Korea to Cuba or East Germany or even China, but none of them have been like North Korea. This amount of isolation, this amount of control, it encompasses every aspect of dictatorship/cult. What I was thinking about when I was living there is it's almost too late to undo this. The young men I was living with had never known any other way. The whole thing begins with the division of Korea in 1945. People think it began with the Korean War, but the Korean War only happened because of the 1945 division of Korea by the US and Soviet Union at the end of World War II. What we're seeing is Korea stuck in between. She goes on to say, the mystery of North Korea that people talk about all the time, people should be asking why Korea is divided and why there are American soldiers in South Korea. These questions are not being asked at all. Once you look at how the whole thing began, it makes some sense why North Korea uses its hatred of the United States as a tool to justify and uphold the great leader myth. Great leader has always been the savior and the rescuer who has protected them from the imperialist American attack. That story is why North Korea has built their whole foundation not only on the Juche philosophy, but hatred of the United States. As this interview went on a little bit further, Kim began to talk about how this nuclear problem was unchangeable because it is a regime problem. She talks about how the only way the regime is going to change is if outside sources pour information into it. This is obviously going to be a difficult thing to do because North Korea is probably the most isolationist nation that has ever existed on this planet. Everything in North Korea is censored. Their TV, their radio, and if they even have access to internet, that is definitely heavily censored. So it's not going to be easy for us here in the West to be able to pour information in, but it is necessary. She even talked about how she had one student, a bright student, who was in an advanced computers class, I believe, with her. And he didn't know about the internet. And this was in 2011. He had no idea what the internet was. Find one person over here in the West who didn't know what the internet was by 2008. Hell, let's go back from 2005. Name me one person in the West who didn't know what the internet was. Kim also talked about how the surrounding nations around North Korea, they want a regime change, yet they're being hypocritical by saying that they're not interested in a regime change in North Korea. Personally, really, I think this is just due to the fact that if they came out and said it, they're immediately going to be put in the crosshairs of Kim Jong-un, and he's unpredictable. He's way more unpredictable than his father, Kim Jong-il, was. Kim Jong-il was at least a reserved man, a calm man. So, you wouldn't expect this, but Kim Jong-un is young and reckless, and his whole life, he's been brought up with a fucking golden pacifier in his mouth. So, he's really erratic. I honestly don't think he's all there mentally. And then there's constant propaganda going around about him. Kim Jong-un could drive since the age of 3. Kim Jong-un knew the whole alphabet from age 1. Kim Jong-un doesn't have a butthole, so he can't take a shit. I believe that's a real one, too. When asked, what is the motivation of people who actually call the shots in North Korea to hold on to the nuclear weapons? Kim replied, they don't have anything else. There's literally nothing else they can rely on. The fact they're a nuclear power is the only reason anyone would be negotiating with them at this point. It's their survival. Regime change is what they fear. That's what the whole country is built on. This is a very simple equation. There is no reason for them to give up their nuclear weapons. Nothing will make them give them up. So no path is good in this situation. What do? Can't bomb them because they'll just bomb you back. You can't pour information into the country because they're highly censored, and even if you do, their masses seem to be highly brainwashed, so chances are they may not even believe it anyway. Can't assassinate Kim Jong-un because it's very likely just another dictator will come into place, one who could be even more erratic or worse, but more likely less educated is going to be a big one. So what do? Which is the path of less evil? You let me know in the comments below. So you figure in a time like this, the US and its allies would come together in an effort to fight this new menace that we have before us. Nope. President Trump has issued a blast of antagonistic comments in the last few days that have made South Koreans doubt that they can take the alliance for granted any longer. On Twitter on Thursday, he declared that talking is not the answer in dealing with North Korea, casting aside the push by the new South Korean President Moon Jae-in to hold talks with the North. On Saturday, he threatened to withdraw the United States from a 5-year-old free trade agreement with South Korea over what he considered its unfair protectionist policies. And on Sunday, after North Korea detonated its most powerful nuclear device yet, he essentially called the South Koreans appeasers. Quote, South Korea is finding, as I have told them, that their talk of appeasement with North Korea will not work. They only understand one thing, end quote, Mr. Trump said on Twitter. Now, as we've already heard, talking with North Korea is not going to work. So Trump is actually right on this. But the way he's gone about it is horrible. Trump was voted in as the jobs president. That's what he was there to do. Build the economy, get Americans back to work. He is awful when it comes to the international stage. This is supposed to be your ally. I mean, even though North Korea is highly censored, you don't think that their top military brass has access to the full internet? That they can't see you posting something like that on Twitter? Of course they are. They'd be stupid not to. And as brainwashed as they are, they're probably not that dumb. And even though negotiation still seems pretty useless at this time, it is still better when nuclear bombs are on the table to talk than fire them off. So again, even though this is pretty much guaranteed to fail, what else is there to do aside for getting into a nuclear arms race with them, which could possibly end in a nuclear missile getting fired off? It's just, we're in a time of another nuclear Cold War, and instead of staying strong with your allies, you're calling them appeasers to our enemy. Do you really think that your allies are trying to give in to North Korea? You really think South Korea is trying to appease? Well, okay, yes, they are trying to appease through negotiation, but Trump obviously means this in a derogatory way. They're trying to kiss North Korea's ass. Do you really think South Korea, after their history, is kissing North Korea's ass and just going to give them whatever they want? This is not the way to go about it. Mr. Moon, who was elected in May promising to seek dialogue with North Korea, fired back at Mr. Trump, insisting that the crisis be resolved peacefully. Quote, "We can never tolerate another catastrophic war on this land," end quote, his office said in a statement Sunday evening. We will not give up on our goal of working together with allies to seek peaceful denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Mr. Moon, who has supported Mr. Trump's push for tougher sanctions against North Korea, and in a call on Monday, their first since the nuclear test on Sunday, the two leaders agreed to lift the weight limits on South Korean conventional warheads, Park Soo-hyun, a spokesperson for Mr. Moon, said. Removing the 500-kilogram restriction, part of a treaty with the United States aiming at preventing a regional arms race, could give the South greater power to strike the North in an event of a military conflict. Mr. Moon and Mr. Trump also agreed for, quote, push for maximum pressure and sanctions against North Korea, end quote, at the United Nations Security Council. But Mr. Moon has argued that the sanctions and pressure alone have failed to stop the North Koreans' advance in nuclear and missile technology. And while Mr. Trump has threatened North Korea with fire and fury, Mr. Moon has said there must be a peaceful solution because South Koreans, not Americans, would bear the brunt of the war. And this is exactly the other point I was coming to, is that if a war breaks out, South Korea is the first one that's going to get hit. They're right there. They've had a shit history with the North. It makes absolute sense that they be one of the first. And that's going to result in the death of thousands, if not the tens of thousands. So Trump is playing this very stupidly because he is putting another country in the line of fire just to look like the big man. There are things we can trust Trump to do because that's what he's good at. International negotiation is not one of those things I would trust him with. Because Trump is one of those people that's got to have the whole pie. And that's not going to work on the international stage. It's one thing when you're playing politics at home, and it's also one thing when you're playing politics with your allies. It's completely different when you're playing politics with your enemies. They're not going to stand for that. So Trump is the wrong person to be involved in negotiations. Even though he obviously has no intention of negotiating, he just wants to wave his bombs in front of Kim Jong-un's face and make him back down. But can we really trust Kim Jong-un to back down? What if he's like Trump? Exactly like Trump. Then we're just going to have two people unwilling to back down, leading us into a catastrophe. Trump's negotiation tactics, it's very different when we're talking business and the international stage. On the international stage, people die. Wars break out. So, Mr. Trump, you cannot play this situation the way you played your campaign. I want to thank you all for joining me here today. I'm Adrian Lloyd. This is just my stupid opinion, and I'll see you soon for another episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please like this video and subscribe, and leave your comments below. You can also take these episode mobiles by downloading them on iTunes or SoundCloud.